Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Transformation, Assembling Your Martech Stack. This is actually the third webinar in a several-part series for Mind the Gap. And we previously focused in on marketing operations. We talked about customer-centric organizations, and today we're diving deep into technology. And here to talk through that with me is Scott Brinker, editor of Chiefmartec, and Kevin Souers, Chief Product Officer at Aprimo. And of course, my name is Ed Brialt, head of marketing, and I work with Kevin and have had many opportunities to work with Scott at Chiefmartec. So getting into it, some key issues that we'll be talking about have to do with the fact that marketers are facing an ever-growing proliferation of technology, and customer expectations at that same time are on the rise. Complexity is overtaking the organization, and as marketing technologists, we must be stewards for our company. And what you'll walk away with is really a view of how to think about technology strategically for your organization. We'll provide a framework to design your Martech stack, and honestly, fresh perspectives from top marketing technologists that you can go and take away to your organization. To set the stage here, what's going on in the market is that we're dealing with complexity with regards to channels. Channel proliferation is on the rise. There's 50 plus comms channels out there that we're dealing with, and new ones pop up all the time. Content is just exploding. I like to call it the 4 V's of content: volume, variety, velocity, veracity. It's that truth in content, and we're trying to keep up as marketers. And we're doing it with limited resources. Finite amount of resources, cost, time, and quality, and the volume at which we can produce marketing is finite. And of course, globalization, as we work across the world in many different regions and countries and in many different languages. And then there's this customer-driven experience out there that we as marketers need to deliver on, where there's these heightened expectations of brands, and we're trying to keep up. And to frame it up into this marketing operations and experience gap framework is you've got the explosion of content moving left to right. You've got an increased amount of channel complexity that you're dealing with, and resources are remaining flat. So it's finite, and arguably those resources could be declining. And as we're trying to deliver great experiences for our customers, this marketing operations gap is exposed, and this customer experience gap is left unfilled, unfortunately, by brands. So the Martech landscape that we're going to shift our conversation into was actually something that Scott started. And what's amazing is that in 2011, there were only 150 technologies on here. And just recently at the Martech conference, 5,300 plus. The Martech 5,000 was introduced. It's just an explosion of marketing technologies that continues to grow and grow. And also, what's happening is marketers are piecing this together in a way that's strategic, that's maybe aligned to the buyer's journey, or maybe aligned to ways in which they go to market, called the Stackie. So this section we call Unpack the Stack. Aprimo was actually a winner of the Martech Stackie Award, and this follows the marketer's journey is what we like to call it, where we take all of our go-to-market programs, put them in systems which are interconnected, and go to market through execution channels and close the loop with data. And what's interesting is going through this exercise, we expose that there's gaps in process, there's gaps in data, and when we went through, we actually cataloged our technologies leveraging the Gartner Pace Layers model, where you've got systems of innovation, systems of differentiation, and systems of record. It really helped us catalog and define our Martech stack, and allowed us to manage these resources in the best way to make decisions to evolve our tech stack to operate more strategically for us. So let's move forward and talk about some key topics of the day and open up the discussion and this idea of disruptive forces. So Scott, let's go to you first. What disruptive forces are pushing on the current state? I know in some of your research you've suggested, digital transformation or microservices and APIs, even vertical competition. digital everything and artificial intelligence. Um, let's go to you first. What are some thoughts on the topic of disruptive forces?
The technology is fascinating. There's some really disruptive things happening there, but I think the biggest disruption by far for most organizations is rethinking how do we organize, how do we structure, how do we manage teams in this new environment.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's. One of the things we can guarantee is we will constantly be disrupted. Kevin, are you seeing anything from being a chief product officer and you think about future-proofing technology that you haven't even built yet? Is there a mental framework? Is there a product strategy that you think about to anticipate some of these things? I think about, if we build technology for today, who's going to license it, tomorrow? How does that? I'll bet you that keeps you up at night.
Well, not up at night, but we obviously embrace it, right?
Yeah.
Those who've heard me talk before hear me say it doesn't matter whether it's an old school channel like mail, or digital advertising, or whatever a kid's going to invent in a dorm room tomorrow. Marketing needs content, funds, data, and people, right? And we saw on the slides at the beginning, people are still a big part of this. I don't care how digital you get, the biggest line item budgets were your people and your services. So how do you manage all those people? We have one customer that gave the challenge to me and said, you manage for me 10,000 campaigns per quarter that go out through a subset of 25 different marketing channels that are provided by 200 different suppliers. And by the way, we have to do it in 15 different languages. So what that is essentially chaos, right? Now you tie in, as Scott mentioned, the data back. We're getting better and better at collecting the performance metrics. So first and foremost, you got to organize your stack, organize your technology about managing that, recognizing content, funds, data, and people. And then you got to think about the future, right? Because I can't believe, Scott, we went 25 minutes without mentioning AI in a marketing webinar.
Sorry about that. I broke it.
Right. And the AI is funny. Scott and I have laughed about it because AI, everyone's talking about it, right?
Yeah.
And we have it embedded and we do it and it does great efficient things, and the bots can do cool little tricks like pull things up, and we do auto indexing of all our imagery, and we use OCR, and right now it's a great efficiency play when you talk about pure AI. But then you go and a lot of people are taking what's essentially predictive analytics, algorithm based, predictive type data analysis. They're calling it AI, but it's really predictive at this point. And saying, what should I do next, right? Because you have all those thousands of people working, millions of dollars flowing, different campaigns performing, different content intelligence on what people like and don't like, right? And right now we're at a point where we can be pretty predictive of, showing in a BI layer of what's important. But what's next, when I think about the future, what these customers should be thinking about in the future is, what long-term am I going to do with that data? Because the machine learning and the AI forces, while not there yet completely in a commercial way, are getting there, and they'll be there soon. So that I can look at that world as it's spinning around and say, this is where I should spend my next dollar. This is what these 10 people should be working on tomorrow. See, that's the future of marketing. It's not that AI replaces the people.
Right.
It's that it's a better use of your overall resources and what can you be doing to make the people most effective. And the customers that are really thinking about this are saying, how do we organize this now in anticipation of this monumental shift, right? Long ago, the CMO that said, I know I waste half my money on marketing, but I don't know which half. That person has been put out to pasture, right? You can't say that anymore. But as soon as that's done and taken care of, the next shift is going to be, how are you optimally deploying these resources? Because sales and marketing ultimately is the second biggest line item in most Fortune 500 budgets. And that's what we spend our time thinking about and working with our customers with.
Excellent. Yeah, you mentioned organization, and where we'll go to next is, we talk about the technology categories. So I mentioned earlier that, when we think about technology, as it proliferates, classifications emerge, new ways to bucket them. When we think about cataloging technology, I mentioned the Gartner's Pace Layers model. What are some of the key Scott, I know you're on your model, you've got numerous, but what are some of the ways to think about classification of technology that maybe the audience isn't thinking about right now that they should be thinking about?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, categories are hard in this space because the two reasons. One, the labels, the boundaries themselves tend to be pretty fuzzy. Yeah, you know, like a classic example is yeah, like on customer data platforms, right? That's a category that's emerged. But if you look at all the different folks who call themselves customer data platforms, there's an incredible amount of variance between what they actually mean by that phrase. So that's one reason. And then the other reason is categories are handy for, I guess, you know, analysts or, you know, people like me who are armchair analysts to have some sort of like, you know, hierarchical scheme by which to, you know, turn it from a complete and total mess into something that's only slightly less of a complete and total mess. But the problem is those categories very rarely align with, at the end of the day, what end customers actually care about in their experiences. And very often some of the most novel and innovative technologies in Martech, they eschew like any one particular category. They're taking a look at you know, like the customer journey through just a lens that crosses over multiple categories. So my advice to most marketers when they're doing a review of their tech stack or they're thinking about what their marketing technology strategy should be is to first and foremost step back, get a really clear understanding of your customer's journey. Forget about any technology you have. What is the customer looking to do? What sort of touch points are they trying to reach you through? What are the expectations they have for what's going to be delivered to them at each of those points? And to sort of use that as your true north for saying, okay, once we understand that and understand the way it's changing, and if you break it down into segments, you break it down into segments, but then you're able to approach the job of creating a technology stack really through the lens of evaluating, okay, which of these pieces are going to give us the capabilities to execute on those expectations at each stage of that journey. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but that's...
Yeah, that's great. I mean, what you're doing, you're thinking about the technology, not just through the lens of the marketer, but how is it helping that customer move along their journey? It's a whole nother paradigm or lens to look through. So very valuable in evaluation of what should be in and what should be out. Kevin, what do you think?
Well, you're going to delve into confessions of a product guy here. You know, you got this explosion of Martech. We all acknowledge that 5,300. They didn't grow up, most of them, saying, I want to solve a category. I'm going to go be part of this category. They solved around an organic business challenge that they saw, right? And as they started to do more things and certain trends emerged, retroactively analysts assigned categories to these things that bubbled up, which is with thousands coming up in the last, 3 years alone, you're seeing why the categories have a huge heterogeneity in them, right? What is a content marketing platform? Well, there's 4 in that category that are leaders that I don't think of doing the same thing. Which goes back to the folks on the webinar is, what do you do when you're buying, right? And the analysts sit and they create a long checklist of things that say, this is what you should do to be in this category. Then the RFPs come out and they have the whole checklist. Let's see if you can do everything. And of course, the product people say, of course we can do everything. Right. And I think that's the biggest thing is I think if I was a buyer looking at categories is be wary of the person who says they do everything, because we just acknowledge you can't do everything. We just acknowledge heterogeneity is not bad as long as you integrate. And, what are you really great at, technology vendor? Forget what your category says you should be good at. To get back to what business problem are you solving, and look out for the fluff where they say, oh, and we do all these things too, because there's a good chance you can't do everything. So there's a good chance if some of those are meaningful to you, but you're bundling in with things that aren't as meaningful to you, you're going to end up with something that's, an inch deep.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, while I've got you, Kevin, I want to navigate to the next question here. We just entered a new year. And when we leave this year, I want to talk about what were some of the trending, if we would build like a word cloud of what was trending this year, what are you seeing as the top of your list right now that maybe your day-to-day conversations, this type of technology comes up, you're thinking about it, you're challenging your current product roadmap and saying, should this be in here now? What are some of the, you mentioned AI, of course, but what are some of the...
there's two types, right?
Yeah.
There's two types. What are people grappling with right now is the control, right? And ultimately, once they have the control, closing the loop. How can I tell what the performance was? So marketing performance management, balancing my non-working capital with my working capital, et cetera. Those are our day-to-day conversations.
Yep.
But certainly with the strategists in the group, there's always a concern. And I love the seat that we're in where we get to go to these big companies over and over and over again and have these conversations. Everyone's always paranoid. Oh my gosh, am I behind in AI? Oh my gosh, am I behind in machine learning? Because the minute someone dabbles their toe just a little bit in it, out screams the headlines and the press releases. The good news is, everything still is in proof of concept. Nothing's large scale commercial. Besides, obviously the AI, the cognitive services, the being able to index, the OCR, all those knowledge base, being able to do a little bit of predictive based on a denormalized data layer, that is all getting in place. But the key is just that. What 2018 should be developing what your strategy is and working with your vendors, even if it's co-development with your vendors, and saying, how can we grow into our targeted AI strategy over the course of late 18, 19, 20. It's not a snap of the fingers. If it's truly going to be transformative for your company, it's not going to be a snap of the fingers. It's not like someone's going to roll out a service and you sign up and turn it on and out spits a million smart things automatically.
Right.
It has the potential to be transformational. You got to make sure you're on the leading edge and not the bleeding edge. And that'll ultimately be done with vendors you trust, with careful POCs. It'll always look great in the PowerPoint, but making it actually work in the lab is a totally different game.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's what's hot in 2018. And Scott, earlier you mentioned bots. I was actually, as a marketer who acquires technology, I realized I've got all kinds of opportunity at the top of my funnel to capture more conversion of a lot of inbound traffic that I've got. And I looked at a bot who could essentially be a virtual concierge on my website. So what are your thoughts on that and others in 2018? When you focus your writing and your coverage for 2018, what are some of the capabilities you'll be looking at?
Yeah, so I definitely think these chat and voice-based touch points are fascinating, and there's still early generations of these, but I've used a number of them just personally, to get things done or, do transactions with businesses. And it is remarkable how seamlessly so many of them now are working. So there's definitely that. I think the other thing that's been on the edge of conversation for a while and is increasingly going to be applicable for more real businesses is the stuff around augmented reality and virtual reality. From a virtual reality perspective, the ability to give people much more immersive content, and there'll be some markets where obviously that makes a lot of sense for, like folks selling trade show booths, real estate folks, and then from an augmented reality, there's clearly very interesting use cases of people who have physical presences like stores or other kind of outposts where people are, that they want to be able to layer that digital information while people are physically in a spot. As a lot of this stuff is still right in that, teetering on the edge of moving from emergent to something a little bit more mainstream. But I expect before 2018 is out, that tipping point will have been passed.
Absolutely, yeah, and we tend to, what's hot right now might actually just be a flash. So this term, what's overhyped? We tend to gravitate to new shiny objects, and we build up hype around technology that's yet to be proven. Some of these just emerging technologies, which I think are great. Some stick, some don't. We could forget about them. What's some, to both of you, what is some hype out there right now that um, do you either, think has some capability to last, or you think it's going to fade out? What are we talking about a lot right now? We talked about AI. Is that one?
I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Obviously, people will hype it up the minute they dip their toe in it, right? And that's just basic software marketing, service marketing. It's challenged to call the same thing that's important also overhyped.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the right term would be recognize where it actually is, right? It's the person who takes the victory lap right now and says they've achieved it in totality. That could be the overhype. The person who says, "Hey, we're taking steps. This is the first in the journey, and isn't this cool? How this happens is exciting and insightful," and is more measured about it. That's properly hyped. So you see a lot of overhype in the market, and it's kind of like closed loop, right? I want to know how my content performs, and we've gone back on Romy for 10 years now, right? And you hear the hype. Hey, I know exactly what the payback was on this particular image, and by the way, the fine print says all you have to do is load your sales data associated with that particular image, and we'll give you the ROI. It's the details in the fine print. So they're all important concepts. They all are overhyped to a degree. You got 5,300 people there trying to raise above the fray. But I wouldn't say they're inaccurately hyped, just maybe a little bit inflated.
Gotcha, Kevin. Scott, what are you seeing that's overhyped?
Well, I think Kevin covered most of it. I mean, the only one that you didn't, give the appropriate shout out to is, blockchain, obviously, right? I mean, it's blockchain. I don't even know what blockchain is, but blockchain, more blockchain.
Yeah, my Bitcoin is on, going down right now.
That's a tough one. You're right, because Aprimo, we manage tens of billions of dollars a year spent, and I got my guys and customers asking, how do you put blockchain in that? Well, that's actually not close to the transactional values you really want for blockchain. Blockchain is more transformative than that, and as much as I love the marketing budgets, unless you're doing B2C direct consumer transaction type stuff, blockchain's probably a little bringing in a bazooka to a BB gun fight.
Yeah, I think moving into being a miner. I don't know if you guys have seen those, but the mining capability of blockchain that's out there performing these transactions just consumes a ton of energy. So yeah, it's absolutely overhyped, and yet to, I think, to be proven
for marketing and other places.
For marketing,
financial services, it's probably underhyped.
It's completely. Yeah, it is very disruptive right now. That's for sure. That's great. This is one topic we'll always be facing, which is what's overhyped. So that's great perspectives, guys. And Scott, you mentioned this earlier, best of breed versus platforms, and you had some analysis done, a really great talk too at the last Martech conference. What's the gist of when we think about best of breed platforms, pros and cons with these options, and what do you recommend?
Gotcha. Yeah, and some of this is just a terminology, like some of the semantics. So the way I would explain it is you could imagine a continuum, and on one end of the curve is the ultimate suite. What do you call that? The atomic bologna slicer or something? Yeah. Anyways, right, so just one piece of software that does... Okay, yeah, sorry, you're registered soon, right? Okay. So that's one end of the spectrum, is imagining one piece of software to rule them all. The other end of the spectrum is, almost every piece of software for itself. I mean, they might all have APIs, they might swap data, but, sort of everything, is competing at almost an equal level, for who owns which pieces of data, who owns which pieces of workflow. And neither one of those extremes have ever been close to reality. And I think to me, the vision of what seems most practical and most likely is in between those two, to say, it makes sense for certain core capabilities, things like, core system of record. Actually, yeah, you go the Gartner piece layering model, right? Like core system of record, for customer data, core system of record for, content and assets, core system of record perhaps for, product data or transactional data. There's a certain set of these tent poles that you really need to provide the organizational structure around which then other things can contribute to and leverage those systems of record. And to me, that's what the word platform really should be about, is those core systems of records, those tent poles, and that around those you can, put in more specialized applications and capabilities, and really kind of get the best of both worlds.
So I like that analogy with the tent poles, and on each of those capabilities of those tent poles, you probably have a longer time duration. You probably think about, categorizing it in a way that you make investments and probably even contract or license for longer term versus shorter term. So the strategy, it's not just building the Martech stack, but how are you going to manage, total cost of ownership across the breadth of your stack in making decisions, longer term decisions for to be more cost effective. I think that's a great way to think about it.
It has born raised to a whole new, as I alluded to earlier, a whole new level of strategy and marketing called integration strategy, right? And I think the term REST API was the most dangerous term ever handed to a salesperson. Right? Oh yeah, I can talk to anything. REST API. It isn't just as easy as flipping on the switch in most cases. Certainly, there are productized connectors with the big pieces, but a lot of platforms have. But at the same time, you're not going to have all repeatable, right? The sales guy comes back, oh my gosh, do we have connectors for these 20 platforms that I just talked to big company X that they need, right? And somewhere in the middle is the truth. So the people that say, oh, it's cake, don't worry, REST API platform or, framework, versus, the people who freak out somewhere. And the reality is in between, right? It's not snap of the fingers to get major systems talk to each other for your unique business case to make sure the right data is flowing. But it also is more achievable than it ever has been in history.
That's great. So that leads me to key attributes of the stack, Kevin. You talked about API and openness of the platform. When we think about the stack in its entirety, these elements or attributes that we could potentially score. I like frameworks, I like scoring models, I like maturity models. When we think about some elements or things that we would say are either good or need improvement on, openness or completeness, cost, what are some of the key attributes if we were to, look at scoring a stack? Scott, what have you seen that, if you think about good technology stacks in their entirety, what should a marketer who's marketing at scale, let's say, that needs a breadth of capability, think about what's good and what could be improved?
Yeah, it's probably hard to do a tremendous amount of justice to that, because it's a great question, but it defies a super short answer. I guess, given that caveat, the two things I will say is one, design for change. That's really what the open API thing is partly about. But there are other aspects of how you evaluate vendors, and will you have access to your data? What are the business terms? You love them, they love you, but if that love were to fade a year from now, what would be your options for switching to something else? Just looking at everything through the lens of a changing world and the need to be able to adapt is super important. And then the other thing is, as much as I am fascinated by the Stackies and these beautiful diagrams that people put together, the phrase Occam's razor, like other things being equal, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. There really needs to be like Occam's marketing stack or something, where other things being equal, the simpler the stack, the better.
Excellent. Kevin?
Yeah, I look at Stack the same way I look at individual pieces of technology. I have 6 guidelines, right, that we've built on, and we've built on now for almost a decade. And first is SaaS, right? And it doesn't mean, if you have it on-prem, go shoot it in the head right away, but any future purchases should be SaaS. But SaaS, number 2, is highly configurable. And this is for the enterprise type customers, even the mid-sized customers. Configurable doesn't mean customizable, but it also doesn't mean lightweight SaaS that you use it completely out of the box. It should be able to adapt to use cases, but still, survive upgrade cycles. The third is integration framework. I've already spoken to, with some evidence that the software knows how to do productized, repeatable connectors. The fourth is a layer of BI, not just operational reports. It doesn't mean it's going to be your BI system of record, but the fact that there is a BI layer with some kind of drill down within the solution says they've thought about the importance of the data within it. The next is user experience. Your user experience across stacks, across the stack, it has to be critical. And it's not going to be perfect at first, but how does it get there? How do you not make the person that your 25-year-old person that grew up with an iPad in her hands, miserable trying to use these quote-unquote systems of record? And the final is continuous core functionality innovation. If the platform's not releasing stuff on a regular basis, you're probably on something that's, riding out the sunset. And so an active roadmap, so that as this world evolves, your capabilities evolve.
That's awesome. Yeah, really great attributes right there. Highly configurable, integration framework, adaptability, the user experience, openness, and then innovation that's coming down from the capabilities within your stack. Now, how does that? Let's go product strategy. So, Kevin, obviously, serial chief product officer. You've built lots of capabilities which were born in the cloud, and then with companies like Aprimo, were reborn in the cloud. And then Scott, you've got multiple companies where you've brought product to market. Scott, I'll go to you first on this. When you think about, if you were to think about bringing a new product to market, and how does your strategy evolve in thinking about it having to fit into a broader ecosystem of technology? And would you be building to fill a gap? Would you be building product to fit? Where does your mind go in terms of product strategy impact to fitting in with a broader tech stack?
Yeah, again, probably hard to do justice to that, but I really like the way. Kevin, what you said earlier about, great products, they get developed by people organically looking at a problem that needs to be solved for someone, and it's sort of, that is the true north. And then, once you've got clarity around that problem and how you're going to solve it, usually then there becomes the second step of saying, okay, that problem probably doesn't live off in a bubble. It's in a heterogeneous world that connects to other things. What are those other things? How do I work well with them? How do I leverage, adjacent platforms, things like that. But yeah, I would definitely focus 95% on that organic, like what is the real problem we're solving, and 5% then on the ecosystem around it.
That's excellent, Scott. Kevin, I know you've got a response here.
Yeah, really quick. Top-down view I'll give you a real-world example. It's undeniable that there's a category collision of MRM, content marketing platforms, and dance, right? The layers become more gray. But we don't sit and look. We observe that, and say, how does that affect our development roadmap and what we're doing? But we observe it with the context of partnering with our customers and saying, what solves your needs? We don't want to build in a tower without, connection to what's actually happening on the front lines. And so that's how we do it. And we're always careful to tell our customers, hey, we're going to partner with you on this, but we're not going to build to spec, right? This isn't a custom job. We'll co-develop, but not to spec. And that's what you want to hear in a vendor. You don't want a vendor that says, I'm going to build exactly what you're asking for, because you don't have the perspective necessarily of other companies, and you want that software to be successful so that it continues to have an innovation pipeline.
That's great, Kevin. Thanks, Scott. I'm gonna move to our last question here because we're coming up to the top of the hour. Really juicy stuff. But let's land this plane with what's in store for 2020 plus. If you guys think quickly, sort of off in the horizon, where these trends are headed, what are you seeing very far off? Where are we going in 2020 plus? Scott, I'll start with you.
The Niels Bohr quote about the problem like predicting the future is hard, or all right, I messed up that quote. Anyways, I don't know if I were going to pick one technology that I think will most fundamentally change just the way in which we operate. It was what Kevin was talking about earlier around AI is a lot of this stuff that's been overhyped here today. The exponential rates at which computing power continues to increase, the expanse of data, the algorithms we're using for this are getting smarter. We're getting much more effective at being able to network data from a variety of sources for these things. I think even what's possible with AI-powered businesses. It's we're very young right now and early in the amount of disruption and change we will see as a result of that technology.
That was great, Scott. Kevin?
Yeah, and I'll close in the end with 30 seconds. When you look at 2020, you can't deny that's, Scott hit the nail on the head. It is going to be a big part of it. It doesn't mean you leave the webinar and freak out and say, oh my God, we need an AI strategy. What I would say is right now, getting ready for that, you need to be getting your data and processes in place, a system of record in place. Can I manage content, funds, data, and people well, whether it's with Aprimo or any other system that does that? It's the ability to have data in place for the machine learning and AI type agents to work upon is what is half, if not 3/4 of the battle. And then let those services catch up with the fact that you have all your data available in a way that can consume Bestofbreed.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Scott, Kevin, thank you very much. Just an amazing talk today. Want to let everybody know, get in this game. The Stackie Awards are coming up, and it actually benefits a great cause, Girls in Tech. And for every Stackie that's donated, it's $100 that goes to Girls in Tech up to $10,000. So submit that by April 6th and get in the fun game. And we had lots of questions come in. We're going to respond to those individually afterwards. But I would like to let everybody know we do have another upcoming webinar as part of the Mind the Gap series. We'll be talking about agile marketing. With Andrea Fryrear. She literally wrote the book on agile marketing in our own Anjali Yakandi. That's coming up March 8th. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your business day. And for more resources, go to aprimo.com into our content hub. Scott Brinker, thank you very much. Kevin Souers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Signing off. Have a great day.